Hello, everyone, and welcome to the week ahead. This week, we are beginning with a last quarter square. So the moon is in the sign of Scorpio, squaring both Pluto and the sun in the sign of Aquarius today, starting. We also have, this is Chariklo, the wife of Chiron, and this is Ceres, the mother goddess. They're both also in the sign of Aquarius, conjunct one another. And I was looking at what Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about the last quarter phase because, and this is, of course, from the Pluto 2 book, which really focuses a lot on relationship, especially the relationship of Mars and Venus, and the composite Pluto. But I often reference the phases because they speak to the evolutionary intention of this particular time. And right now, the evolutionary intention in the last quarter phase, he says the soul has now entered a stage of evolutionary development wherein a crisis of values and the meaning of life and those values begins to occur. The soul will now begin to desire to expand its level of awareness in order to relate itself to a more universal sense. It will want to embrace the ideas, philosophies from other cultures that offer different perspectives on the nature and the meaning of life. And in this way, the soul will begin to relate itself in even larger ways, progressively needing to value and needing other people who also within themselves are standing sort of outside of current society. And it becomes essential for the soul to have these relationships and support in order to progressively move forward. In other words, what he's saying, is there comes a time in our journey where the crisis of our identity starts to form in such a way that the things that we used to value and feel safe and secure within, relationships, jobs, identity structure, social roles, things like that, no longer give us that level of fulfillment. So we're seeking some greater meaning and purpose in our lives. And then in that seeking, we have to kind of step outside of those normative roles. He talks a little bit later on in this. This challenge can create a sense of insecurity within a relationship because whereas we're trying to, you know, have the relationship within the conditioning within existing society linked with a sense of normalcy, to move away from this conditioning can result in a sense of insecurity. Paradoxically, the real security will be realized when each partner accepts the challenge within this evolutionary phase and encourages the other to explore a direction that will expand their level of consciousness. Now, in a relationship, especially with this Venus-Saturn dynamic, this can look like the breakdown of the relationship, the ending of the relationship, wherein one partner accepts that the reality of what needs are being met within the relationship are not sufficient, and the other accepts that the reality within this level of relationship are not sufficient, but they can't seem to meet the needs of the other within the relationship. So the form of relationship has to change in order for them to experience a fulfillment, a sense of fulfillment. And there is insecurity in that change of form because it can mean, oh, are we not together anymore? We're not in a relationship anymore. How do we relate to each other? If there are Saturn roles and responsibilities, as well as finances linked to that relationship, that can also create a sense of insecurity because we don't know how to relate to those roles or those changes. Also, we have Mars here in the sign of Cancer. Now, Mars is currently in its retrograde, and a lot of what we're exploring with the Mars retrograde is the vulnerability of where our, desire for connection and, you know, what do children want, right? They want connection, they need to be fed, they need sleep, right? They need a sense of creative freedom or autonomy, right? The progress from Cancer to Leo is the progress of the child from infancy to childhood. And that often, especially with toddlers, comes with this like increasing sense of I am mine, I am me, this is mine, that is you, right? And we'll see that as Mars comes back into Leo, our desire for the me, mine, creative freedom, that is a part of that Pluto work of individuating oneself from the collective, right? That is a part of that relational work of saying, well, this is my heart. This is what I want. And how we can get stuck because we can't seem to find how to get our heart's desires met within the connection of relationship, wherever that breakdown is happening. You know, I work a lot on these dynamics within my class series, Love Evolution, which you can sign up for the course, Love Evolution. I've taught on all the Venuses. I just taught on this particular Venus and Pisces cycle for our class. And then we meet once a month to do a live practice class. And the live practice allows you to integrate this information into your own natal chart, right? And Pluto is in Aquarius, right? Which is the sign of the collective, the community. It's also very forward thinking. And yet we can't really move into forward thinking structures, ways of relating to humanity as kin, as humankind, until we've met those basic emotional needs, right? The expansion in relationship can't come until basic emotional security has been met. And for a toddler, the reason why they can expand beyond the mother, the immediate source of nourishment and protection is because they've reached a level of getting those basic needs met. And then they can kind of rebel against the status quo, right? They can say, I'm not going to do what you asked me to do because I have my own freedom, right? I'm learning this with my 2.5-year-old a lot lately. And what her needs for freedom and her needs for connection are simultaneous. And that's true of all of us. Our need for freedom, our need to explore creatively what we're here to do, who we're here to be, what our identity is, who we are in relationship, who we are in our calling, in our purpose, our God-given direction in life, the ultimate meaning that we make of our lives is simultaneous to our need for connection. Our need for connection to our source is ultimate, but we often project that need for connection onto our partners or our family or our sources of security. Where do we find our security? That need for connection can be put onto any source of power or security. So that can be on our home, right? And if we find ourselves housing insecure, there can be a great sense of loss of stability and security. There's so many people right now who are displaced because of the fires happening in Los Angeles County, right? That is core ultimate security being challenged. And yet, when these crises occur, and often the square, we're in a last quarter square here with the sun and the moon, the square, which can represent a crisis of that is challenging us. And we have uh, the conjunction, which recently happened between Venus and Saturn. So now Venus is in a new phase to Saturn, right? That crisis, which then starts over in the new phase, in calling us into where we find our ultimate meaning and purpose. Of course, Venus herself, this phase that she's moving towards a conjunction with Neptune and then a conjunction with the North Node, and she's going to start a whole new cycle with the North Node, really bringing in greater meaning and purpose into our lives. And yet, part of where we are in this cycle is a loss of connection to something that has given us a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of fulfillment and source. And whenever we let go of something, when we're letting go of a relationship, there is a natural grieving process that has to take place. That grief, because especially with something, if we lose a home or we lose, if a family member passes away, or, whenever there's a very critical loss in our lives, if we lose a sense of meaning and purpose in the work that we're doing, right? There is a transition phase that includes grief, that includes loss, because we have to feel the vulnerability of not knowing what's coming next. We have to feel the vulnerability of not knowing where our source is, where our sense of connection is. And often these kinds of experiences can actually throw us back onto ourselves in a way that is ultimately fulfilling a part of our soul's journey to come to know ourselves as deeply connected to our source. And at the same time, that can be very challenging and bring up a deep sense of insecurity or a lack of knowing what our meaning is. And this week we have Vesta, who's also in the sign of Scorpio. She's the goddess of the home and the hearth. She is the tender of the sacred flame. If has to do with our roles in helping others on their healing journey, there can be a deep sense of learning and leaning into the vulnerability of what we have to learn first in order for others to learn from us, right? Every teacher, and I am one, I tend to teach astrology not from like, yes, I reference Jeffrey Wolf Green. He's a primary teacher for me, and I'll, read the source material so you can hear it from him as opposed to from me. And then I break it down from me based on my direct experience with those archetypes. Because I have come to learn that direct experience of what happens when the moon is in Scorpio. This is why I'm always orienting us towards the sun and the moon, because they're the most relatable to our immediate journey. And then we can go back and look back. Like for myself, I do a lot of research on parents and children. And interestingly, this morning I was quite fascinated by what were the transits for me as a parent when I was meeting first the father of my children, and then what are the transits that are happening when my child was being born that relate back to that original meeting? Because there was something that I wasn't aware of at that time. I didn't know when I was meeting this person that they were going to be the father of my children, but that the stars were instinctively pointing to various aspects of each of my children's birth. And then most recently, my son, he's a fulfillment of an answered prayer. But there's elements of the prayer for him that are unanswered for me that I'm really reconciling with changes in my life and my relationship that I don't quite understand. I haven't been able to find, uh, but I'm in this deep prayer of resolution, of healing, of understanding, of clarity, because it relates to even the coming of more children in my family, or it relates to the safety and security, the bottom line safety and security of my family, and where I'm feeling myself really called to step into something that's quite unknown and scary and unfamiliar for me. So we can look in our own lives. And and this is why a lot of why I do these live practices. This year coming up in my advanced practice course, we're going to be looking at family dynamics, specifically between parents and children. And we're going to be looking at relationship dynamics, specifically between partnerships and, those core security relationships. Because I find that that is where our deepest sources of evolution happen, right? Evolution is seeded in the family and it's grown in the relationship. And so, whatever we picked up from our core family conditioning, that was the seed that we were born with. We were born with those impressions. And then in intimate partnership and relationship, in parenting relationships, parenting partnerships, we carry that evolution forward because that's the mandate where we get the most triggering, the most evolutionary growth, and also the most opportunity for healing, right? Those relationships don't have to always be triggering, although they often can be. Um, but they are also a source of our continued evolution. Similarly, we can find this in our core calling, right? In our work, in our um, place where we're asked to be of service to humanity. We can find this in our own healing journey, especially if we're dealing with a long-term illness or a long-term pain or trauma, right? These are the places where we're called into bringing Vesta in particular, our sacred light, our sacred duty, our sacred service. And Juno here, who's the goddess of marriage and commitment, right? Where we find that in the source or the seeking for the one or the beloved other in our spiritual journey, right? In our journey with intimacy and sexuality, right? These are the places where we find ourselves learning critical lessons about our own evolution. And this week is developmentally a part of that process as the moon is with Vesta and then the moon is with Juno, the goddess of partnership and commitment. And then we'll see that we're closing out here the lunar cycle. The moon will be opposite Jupiter, right? And square to Saturn, square to Venus this week. And then we'll move into Capricorn, closing the cycle before we begin with an Aquarius new moon. And the Aquarius new moon will be next week. For those of you who are in my any of my live practice classes, in any of my courses right now, we will be having a new moon ceremony for the moon in Aquarius. That'll be next week on Wednesday. And, part of the journey to that new moon includes the moon opposite Mars in Cancer. And we are in an interesting place, I'll just say. The day that the moon opposes Mars, we also have Mercury entering Aquarius. Couple of different things that are happening here. Mercury is getting closer to the sun, which means Mercury is getting closer to the midpoint of his retrograde cycle during the direct season. Venus is also in her midpoint or beyond her midpoint now and getting closer to her retrograde cycle. Mars is also in the midpoint of its retrograde cycle, and Jupiter is coming to the end of its retrograde cycle. So the retrograde itself, within the dynamic of evolutionary astrology, is pointing to an acceleration of the soul growth so that we can resolve soul dynamics. Mars in Cancer, resolving emotional dynamics where our anger or the repression of our anger, the repression of our feeling has led to codependent patterns in relationship. Where do we suppress ourselves and then we're not able to express ourselves? And then we end up feeling alone, lonely, disconnected, scared of separation because, or scared of doing the things that we're called to do because we're in connection, but we're not in connection with ourselves. And of course, rage or, emotional content will build and build and build until it's released. And those releases can kind of feel like eruptions or sort of disconnections, emotional uh, dependency gets broken. And then we get thrown back into places where we feel like little children, right? Where our childhood patterns around our feelings or emotions get pressurized. And as we experience those, each time we experience those, but with the ability to reparent ourselves, or the ability to express our emotions safely, or the ability to acknowledge, oh, I was feeling really stifled there. I was feeling controlled. But it's not because of the partner or the boss or the work, or the person in the position of power and authority, but it's actually because these old patterns have never had a chance to emerge in our consciousness. And we've never had a chance to meet ourselves emotionally and take self-responsibility for our emotions. And thus, then we're facing this feeling again, which is a familiar feeling. And that is where we get to heal, right? That is where we get to experience uh, an emotional catharsis that is a healing process for us. So we kind of have this, and we get to clear out, there was a clearing out in my relationship that happened after the moon crossed the south node. There was a clearing out in my connection, right, which I notice and observe. And it's a necessary thing, but it comes with all this vulnerability. And it comes with all this unknown of like, what are we doing? Who are we to one another? What are the roles that we're going to play? How are we going to relate to each other on a daily basis, right? And this can be happening in many different ways in your life and in your own experience. I just share these examples, hopefully because it helps to relate for you to the things that you're working on, to the evolutionary desires, of course. And the desires that we have is to have a new sense of freedom, a new sense of identity, to begin to resolve patterns from the past emotionally that haven't worked for us, that haven't given us the desires of our heart, right? Venus is moving towards Neptune, this ultimate desire for connection with the beloved other, for the beloved source. This ultimate desire that we have, Venus is going to trine Mars in that. The desire that we have for emotional connection, the desire, right? These young children desires to feel safe and secure and loved don't go away because we're adults. If anything, if they had not been met in childhood, they become um, what they call in this work that I do um, in co-counseling, they call these frozen needs, right? Where the recording for the need from childhood gets frozen, and then we sort of repurpose them in other relationships or in other triggers. And you can see what's this grand trine that's moving here between the water signs. It's Juno in Scorpio, Venus and Neptune in Pisces, and Mars in Cancer. And Saturn is moving towards also emphasizing that trine. Saturn's moving with, Saturn and Mars are going to trine, right? So this is very much going to have to do with the former inadequacies of the masculine in our lives, of caregivers, of providers, and the pressure, right? The pressure to provide, the pressure to be the one, right? Being the one for someone else is a huge source of pressure because it's fulfilling all of the empty roles of the unmet needs of the parents and our parents, and where all these things sort of failed to meet the child inside of us, right? And if you've ever seen children, they're incredibly needy. They need a lot of attention. They need a lot of love. They need a lot of care. Really, two people need to be serving a child 24/7 in order for all of those needs to be met, and they'll never be met perfectly. And if we can recognize this from our childhood, that of course our parents would have failed immeasurably to meet our needs. There would have been moments when we would have been crying and no one was there to pick us up, not because nobody wanted to pick us up, but because it was just physically impossible to do that. And especially, the larger our family, or the more trauma our parents had, or the more disconnection and separation, and the less community and the less support that they had, and the less capacity they had to really meet us, the more that our sexual needs as adults, our emotional needs as adults, our physical needs as adults can be deep triggers for this incapacity to have been met as a child. And the more that gets projected, especially on our ultimate meaning, our ultimate value, our ultimate worthiness, and of course, our ultimate source, God, creator. We see God as having failed us. We see our source as being, as lacking, as being limiting because our parents were such, but not because that is the truth of our creator, not because that's the truth of God, or um, and because we became dependent on human beings who were ultimately very human and very fallible, we end up having a very skewed relationship to our creator, to our source. And as Venus moves towards this conjunction with Neptune, we have a new perspective that's wanting to come in. We have a new relationship to the beloved other. We maybe are creating space in our life for a new relationship to come in. We are maybe creating space to actually experience healing in a relationship, or experience a new source of connection, so that we can ultimately meet the other in a way that is more out of a place of more equality and more healing, as opposed to more, excuse me, inadequacy or not enoughness, right? As long as we're dealing with the South Node in Virgo, we're going to be progressively releasing patterns of guilt, inferiority, um, inadequacy, and replacing those patterns of guilt and inferiority with a sense of connection to our source, to an ultimate meaning that is greater than us, right? These are the big lessons of the next 18 months. Yeah, and so this week I have for my teaching, we will be doing The Goddess Within, which is my class series on the 6 major asteroid goddesses, um, Juno, Vesta. We have Hygeia, the goddess of health and well-being, who's also getting a square from Mercury this week, Lilith, and Pallas Athene. So if you're interested in learning about these goddesses in your natal chart, you can sign up for that class series. And then we'll be doing the live practice class this Friday. Um, and for those of you who missed the Venus practice class, that recording is that class series is ongoing. So all those recordings are available. And then you can join the live practice classes. All of this information can be found under the courses page. You can choose any one of my courses. And we'll also be doing the live practice class for foundations of astrology. So if you want to learn about the basics of your natal chart, what does it mean if your ascendant is Aries rising? What does it mean if you have the moon in Scorpio? Right? These things we learn about in Foundations of Astrology through learning about the polarities. I taught the classes each polarity at a time. So Aries, Libra, and then we learned Taurus and Scorpio, and then Gemini and Sagittarius, and Cancer and Capricorn, and Leo and Aquarius, and Virgo and Pisces. And learning all 6 polarities, we went around the entire zodiac and then we applied it to your natal chart. So the practice class for Foundations of Astrology is also coming up. And you can learn with me live. So you sign up for the course and then you get immediate access to all the pre-recorded content. And then you get to join my next live practice class for that course. So if you're interested in joining me for any of that, all of the information, the link to join the courses is in the description to this video. And if you sign up before the live practice classes on Fridays, you'll be eligible to join our practice class and get to apply this to your natal chart. So I hope that you'll join me. I hope you have a beautiful week ahead as you're working on these core themes in your life and in your relationship. As always, please let me know what touched your heart. I love hearing from you. I love knowing when these things resonate with you. And give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I put out a weekly video every week, and then I do a lot of free teaching on this class, including special reports. I'm hoping to come to you with a special report on the goddesses this week so we can tune into what they're doing for the year ahead. And I hope to hear from you very soon. Lots of love, my friends, and bye for now.